Okay. I'll just keep the chat window open. Anytime you face any issues with either audio or anything, please you can talk. And I'm putting you on mute for now.
Okay.
You can unmute yourself if you have any questions during the session.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, so today's session, I'm taking on introduction to chatbots. So this is a very brief introduction to, I would not say brief, but at least a quick start introduction to what are chatbots and how one can explore creating one. So we would have a very light demo. Though it's a EcoBot on Telegram, but that would be a way of just getting the idea how to set up one. So since I have experience with Telegram bots, so I'll just try to show that out. Just before I can start, Fazan, do you have any experience with chatbots?
No, as such, I do not have any experience with chatbots, but I am very much excited to know about them. So basically, you're going to give a brief demo.
So I'll be talking first, and then finally at the end of it, I'll be giving a demo. Okay.
That's fine. Yeah, that's great.
And just to get know more about you, you are a developer or more
Yeah,
a different of your background.
I'm a senior software engineer. I work in Bangalore. So basically, development and DevOps. Dog.
Okay. So what are any programming languages you know?
I know PHP, JavaScript, Node.js,
Python?
Python. No.
No problem. Unfortunately, my demo is in Python, but you can do the same thing in JavaScript as well. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Awesome.
So
So
language is
let's.
not an issue.
Language should not be an issue, and also learning Python is really trivial. But that's aside, you can always do the same thing in JavaScript. I'll be
Yeah.
explaining how you can.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So let's start the session. So first would be talking about what is chatbots, a little bit of the flow, how chatbots or how typically a chatbot would work behind the scene, and then a typical architecture and the types of chatbots, and also some of the frameworks that right now there are in the market for explore for developing a chatbot, and also how can you do one. So we will try to see a demo on a Telegram bot which I have created for this session. All right. First, to understand what are chatbots, a chatbot is kind of a first bot. To understand a bot is kind of a computer program that tries to automate some kind of an activity, and there can be interactive chatbots or a non-interactive one. Now, if ever you have been part of DevOps, you develop a lot of scripts. But also there are cases where you would want something automated. So
Yeah.
a general format when we talk about bots is that you send some instructions to something which runs as a background, and it does some kind of a action and then sends a response of that action happening. Mostly chat bots are associated either with robotic process automation or a kind of a daemon. We call it if some kind of a daemon that is running an infinite loop with having certain services exposed, or we also know something as chatbots. So chatbots are basically kind of programs that simulate human conversation. So whenever so there would be an interface through which you can talk to the particular kind of a non-human interface, and you would be talking either through your normal English or you would be passing on certain set of commands. But that would be through an interface in a much more free flow format, like you do in messaging applications. And typically, a chatbot interface would be something similar to kind of a a messaging interface. And what in response it will give is there's some kind of a response that would be driven by a little bit of an intelligence, unlike other kind of programs where you just give on commands and it gets you a response. A chatbot is a bit different because it understands our natural language that we speak. It processes it, and then tries to give out a meaningful response. And that's how it tries to either continue a conversation or provide a certain set of services or responses. So there are usually chatbots are two types. One is rule based, which have certain set of rules defined behind them, and each of the statements that we give as a human to that chatbot is converted to those commands, and then it responds back as a response. But at different levels of this particular interaction that we have a chatbot, some kind of an artificial intelligence is involved. And typically these kinds of services are meant to do a lot of different kinds of depending on different kind of scenarios. They are helpful to do different kinds of I would say operations. And some of the typical platforms on which chatbots have become very famous are Telegram, Facebook, Slack, and now many more custom agents. So many of these websites where you go and just you a pop-up where you want to get a service, quick service. So those chat help desk or customer agents are all now converted into more and more as chatbots. Okay, so now let's look at some of the what you call well-known chatbots that are available. So I will try to show a bit of history of how chatbot evolved. So some of the most foremost or earliest chatbots that were developed were way back in 1966. It was it was known as Eliza. So it pretty much mimicked the human conversation and responded with a certain set of rule-based dialogues. So what we spoke, it would try to decipher it and try to give some kind of a meaningful response based on certain rules defined. So there are certain set of rules that if this statement comes and if this statement contains something, what is the response would be, and based on that it would respond. And then there were some more advancement happened in 1972 where there was little bit of I would say a better chatbot where, or I would say not chatbot, but a program, artificial intelligence program that understand the intent and then responded. And then from there on, there are a lot of various other bots have been developed, which are mostly driven by I would say development in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and various other aspects. So one of the initial examples were Alice. So while Alice had what you call a rule-based processing, which used much more like a set of dictionary, and then based on that it had certain rules and then it responded, but it also had a bit of natural language capability. Then we have Mitsuku, Jabberwock, Botster, Cleverbot. So and now, I mean, the list is huge. But some of the most interesting highlights that have happened from the start of the decade is probably IBM Watson, that actually showed how a typically intelligent bot can in fact beat human beings in their own game, where it was involved in a game of Jeopardy. and a tone, where we show that how using artificial intelligence, big data, and natural language processing, along with some kind of a voice interface, actually can make you sound like human being. Then Siri came. So Siri was probably one of the most first, I would say, if not chatbot, but at least an audio bot or an audio assistant kind of a bot, which without any kind of a UI, or a minimal UI, and with natural language processing, was able to process commands like calling someone or doing our daily tasks. And the same is with Google Assistant as well. And then now we have Alexa, which is like kind of a home automation, and kind of a lot of automations that you can do by doing a text to what you call speech to text kind of interface. And now the next wave of chatbot innovations that are coming up is with frameworks, where bot frameworks are being developed on tops of chat messaging platforms, where starting from any kind of function you think of it, you have now a bot framework supporting you, be it Microsoft bot framework or IBM Watson assistant framework, uh, and Messenger, or even our Telegram. They all have some kind of a bot framework embedded, where these bot frameworks are meant to glue lot of APIs, and then using a human, what you call natural language processing interface, they would be able to provide services based on just chatting with them. All right. What would you need? So, question would be, why would you need chatbots? Because much of these services, what you think a chatbot is providing, are already provided by the existing interface, like websites, or let's say even you are making a telephone call to call center. So, why would you need, after all, a chatbot? There it seems that there are certain set of areas where chatbot shines. One first is a lot of cases where, for operational activities, for example, doing support work, or like in a call center, or be it in case of um, talking in case of you are doing some kind of chat support for your customers. So all of these areas, at least in these areas, and even more, let's say you are doing a middle office operations, so in or front office operations, there are a lot of things that can be automated, where instead of having a human being, you can have a chat based interface, which would help to automate some of these activities. And a good thing is that with human beings, there has to be either shift based setup, or there would be either I would say a limited time span where they would be supporting, and sometimes there would be also a queue by the time they can respond. But in case of a chatbot, they are always available, and they can support you all the time. And then other aspects are that they are able to respond in a human-like format, and a much more interactive format, unlike probably a chat or a website can provide. Because problem with websites is that you find the information, but in case of a chatbot, the understanding is that you give a question, and it finds a response for you automatically. It searches and finds the response for you, which actually helps a much better interface, specifically in case of help help desk kind of environment, uh, than elsewhere. And also it has much better response times. All right, so there are two types of chatbots. One is retrieval based models, and then another is generative models. So what are these? Retrieval based models are the one where you are actually having predefined responses to predefined requests. So if you give something like hi, so a retrieval based model would probably be responding hello. So if you say something out of line, then it would have a default response. Let's say, I didn't understand. please give me any of these below responses. So if you have a structured kind of a environment where you have certain predefined set of operations to be done, and then when you interact, a retrieval based model is what usually you will find in multiple industries wherever chatbots are being deployed. But generative and most of the cases, either it would use some kind of a heuristics, or either it would use some kind of a rule based system, or it would try to use something like a regular expressions for trying to decipher what are the kind of in your statement what kind of commands are present, and then respond it with a specific it would try to map it to a command and then respond to it. In case of a generative model, it is a little different. In a generative model, what happens is that these are smarter chatbots, and these are what you would find. These are the kind of chatbots which probably you would find in something like Google, where typically what happens is that they have some kind of a brain, or typically they would have degree of intelligence where they will decipher your commands not based on kind of set of rules, but at least some kind of patterns that they have experienced earlier. So, and based on that, they can adapt. So, if you have any, if you are putting that particular chatbot in a new scenario, it would respond with a different kind of an answer, and that kind of a model needs some kind of machine learning or deep learning kind of a learning beforehand. So what kind of a generative model what has to happen is that a degree of learning has to happen, where you would be training it initially with certain set of commands and certain set of rules, and then up automatically as and when the chatting progresses, it would learn and then it would respond to the specific scenarios. So that makes generative models much more adaptive to changing situations than retrieval based models. But as far as in the case of generative models, the biggest problem is that they are approximate. They are not always absolute, and also there is a degree of training involved in them. So that's why. So these are the two specific differences, and generally getting a particular chatbot absolutely right in case of where you have degree of artificial intelligence involved is not absolute always easy. But now, thanks to the development in the kind of models that we are developing, or algorithms to handling what you call in processing natural language, and then creating predictive models out of initial training. So this newer training models are much more helpful in creating much more adaptive chatbots. So, so as I said, in a generative model, the bots are continuously getting smarter and learn as they speak to people. Now let's look at another dimension about chatbots, that is about open domain and closed domain. So what does a open domain or a closed domain means? So a domain means the subjects on which a chatbot or a chatbot is meant for. So when we said the previous one, right, the retrieval based models, so these are basically rule based models. So rule based models are best suited for a closed domain environment. That means they have a definitive set of operations to be done. There is much more structure in light of in the kind of commands that would be put up and the kind of responses that you can expect. But open domain is a scenario where a chat conversation can go into any direction, and they are generally the most difficult kind of scenarios to operate in. A typical example of a open domain conversation would be, for example, you are talking to somebody like a kind of a virtual being, and you're talking about your pains, problems, and you're expecting some kind of a response, or effectively talking to something like Google. But in case of Google, even to get the kind of response that it gives, there is a huge computation power that is involved. And the general approach is that in case of a rule-based model, closed domain scenarios are much more easier in a retrieval-based system, but it is always impossible to operate rule-based. If you are making a particular chatbot for open domain systems, it is impossible to implement a retrieval-based chatbot. Uh, Again, in case of a closed domain case, using rule based plus little bit of natural language processing and artificial intelligence, you would make a much more smarter machine or a smarter chatbot. And much of the chatbots that you see today in last few 2 to 3 years are primarily these kinds of chatbots where they have a closed domain, where they have a specific set of requirements, or a specific set of operations and rules defined, and on top of that, much of your whenever any exceptional scenario comes, it either learns or at least tries to map it to using machine learning techniques or deep learning techniques to the given set of parameters that already holds, and then tries to respond it. So that's where the smarter machine part comes in. But if you look at the generative model at completely at an open domain, which is general AI, where so you talk to somebody like a bot, and it talks back to you like a person, and actually can handle any kind of scenario, that is very difficult. So the approach how the conversation operates is that if you are building some kind of a enterprise application chatbot, always set up a domain, and then you can set up certain sort of basic rules or basic API endpoints, and then you can bring in NLP, and then for handling any kind of commands or any kind of statements that comes from the by the user, you can try to convert it into certain models, and then you can respond to that accordingly. So I'll just directly try to now move to so another aspect that impacts a chatbot that operates is long and short conversations. Typically for a smart chatbot, which comes under this fourth category, which is mostly generative based closed domain chatbots, the biggest problem is handling conversations. So and also even rule based kind of chatbots, it is much easier if you have shorter conversations where the statements from users are shorter, and you try to analyze it and try to make sense of it and respond to it. The longer the conversation, it becomes that much difficult for you to understand the sense of the conversation or get an inference out of it, because how a particular chatbot works, it works in a format where you give some kind of a or most typically chatbots work is where in kind of a customer support or kind of a operational environment where you give some kind of a command, a short message, and that it gets you a response. But if you start writing long paragraphs, it may be possible that you may have multiple thought process or multiple intents, and that would become much more difficult for the chatbot to understand. And that is actually real also. If you look at try to talk to Siri, or you try to talk with Google Talk, if you give short commands, it will immediately respond. But the bigger line or sentence that you put or commands you give, it may be difficult for it to respond. So it is always advisable to have the kind of a set your chatbots to like a shorter conversation, and try to make it much more. But again, it's always possible that a longer conversation may happen, specifically when some kind of a person tries to uh, ask questions where he wants to put up all his issues down into some kind of a problem. So it depends on how you want to handle it. Do you want to just save it, or do you want to process it? And that for that the kind of models or the kind of AI that you want to use may become that much more difficult. For example, if they are shorter conversations, it can be easily rule based. but if they are like something like mails, or they are even bigger text paragraphs, then you have to do a much more deeper processing and try to find the necessary intent at different levels, and then try to figure out to what kind of things or actions that you need to do. Okay, as I told, that vast majority of systems are retrieval based systems. So because a retrieval based model is quick to develop, and also it is focused on providing service, and much more businesses and startups are focused on providing that additional support, which a website or a typical kind of setup, let's say in case of a uh, um, uh, in case of a customer support, or in case of a let's say if you are working on a DevOps kind of a role, then in case you are running some kind of a automation system, you want some kind of a response or operation to be done there are fixed set of commands that you want to do. The only thing that you would always want is that instead of giving that specific commands that it understands, you give much more human readable, or a human understandable format, and it responds to you back. So that is the kind of chatbots that mostly are developing. Generative models are also becoming much more what you call prevalent now, and they are much more useful in case of for where you want to try to ascertain what kind of a person is there, and try to build a profile of that person. An example would be, for example, if you have somebody who is facing clinical depression. So to understand if he is facing clinical depression, you need longer conversations, and you need a much more bigger personality profile based on what kind of things he's talking, what kind of mood he's talking about, what kind of implications are there to his talks. And that kind of a thing that would need probably a big data processing. It would need some kind of artificial intelligence to create to generate the responses to it to get much more information. Uh, so a typical example for retrieval based system would be either something like flight booking, train booking, or a hotel booking. Or typically, if you are trying to do some kind of an operation, let's say to a banking account, you want to see quickly what is your bank status or your bank balance, or all this kind of information can be put into a retrieval based model, which can be smarter with NLP. Okay, so this is a typical chatbot flow. So what happens is that first, a chat client where you have a web-based or chat-based UI, which can be Telegram or can be Messenger, Facebook Messenger, and from there somebody puts a message. A user types a message, then it reaches to a chatbot. So chatbot would be typically a program, and it would pass on to its basically natural language processing engine. And that particular what it will do is it will try to first read that particular text, break it into different grammatical parts, then try to extract the kind of intent or understand the what is the thing, what is the scope or subject that it is trying to raise, and then pass on that information back to chatbot. So if any commands are in that, then what would happen is that chatbot would if there is any mapping that happens, that this particular is the command and that's the service to be called, so it will call the necessary service. So either it can call data service or kind of application service. And then what would happen is that if that particular service would send a response to the chatbot, and then it would respond back in the message. It will either, if that particular service does some kind of operation, like going to a database, fetching some information, or doing some kind of an operation of like doing a kind of a triggering some kind of operation like booking a ticket or something. So it would do that operation and then respond back that I'm doing it. So typically the advantage with case of a chatbot is, unlike a website where you always expect an immediate response and it's much more asynchronous, kind of a synchronous flow can be framed out of chatbots. And a chatbot can take a bit of a delay, unlike your websites where you at least always want an immediate response. Because a chatbot, usually you let's say if you're on a website, you are expecting an immediate response within 30 seconds, for 5 seconds or 2 seconds. In case of let's say a chatbot, you can always wait for a 1, 2, 3 minutes for a response. So that is the thing that probably also plays with you. So mostly the biggest aspect about chatbots is not the technology. The technology is already in place. Chatbots were already operational way back when Yahoo Messenger was there, when IRC was there. Chatbots were there. But now chatbots have come into vogue is because of this whole natural language processing feature, and also the feature of integrating artificial intelligence to trying to make them more smarter, and also the kind of I would say a much more acceptance of people trying to use messaging platforms, and hence you are now looking at so many chatbots popping up. So this is a typical architecture of how a AI chatbot would operate. So basically, when we are talking about natural language processing, it means natural language understanding. So what would happen is that if you have, let's say, a sentence, it would try to find noun, it would try to break adjective, and then it would try to find all the other parts of speech, and then it will try to, from that, it will try to extract the specific operation and also the entity to which it is dealing with, and then try to do some kind of an action around it. And in that particular analysis that it is doing based on that intent and entities it is extracting, once it extracts, it will try to do an action, which is an API call to any kind of data API or any kind of operation API. And then it will send a response. And that's how you probably would be getting a response. So in this case, the artificial intelligence part primarily would come in two ways. One is in understanding the whatever the text that has been placed by the person, and then understanding those entities, and then generating a response. There are many ways in which. So if you have a rule-based system backend, so it can do a rule-based matching, and then so it would be much more retrieval-based system. But if you want to actually give a human response, so you can get that particular intent, and then try to search, and then you do a scoring, and then send back that this is what I think are the best responses, and then based on that scoring you give back to the response. And you also can mention that I'm this much confident that this is the possible response. Or in fact, you can also do a scoring and then give the best response as a response. So if the human being understands, they would try to go on with the conversation. That's the general way in which AI works. So the whole process of trying to understand that particular input message and then trying to give an output message also is where a deep learning kind of a model would work. So some of the deep learning models that can be used in chatbots. One is dual encoder LTSM network. So these are basically types of deep learning we call RNNs, or how would I tell this? Do you know about deep learning, Fizan?
No, no.
Oh, okay, no problem. So I'll just try to skip, but I'm just mentioning the kind of deep learning algorithm that you can do is one is this RNNs are basically neural networks, and these are basically how would I say RNNs are they would send a reciprocal, that is a feedback. They will send a feedback to their to that output that they have. So how our neural network works is that it has an input, it has an output. What it tries to tune is that parameters. Based on that, where it would match the input and output. So how this particular models match, or how a deep learning works is that first it has a training period. where you get give a certain set of inputs, and there would be a multi-layer kind of a mathematical network. And this mathematical network, you would give multiple scenarios, and this particular mathematical network would have certain set of parameters in them at different layers. So these particular things you see, right, these are the different layers, and these are the variables, okay. And these variables are tuned based on whatever inputs you get, okay.
Yeah.
And they would be actually always tested against the output. And if all these cases, if the input and output matches, and for a given set of parameters, in that multiple layers, where there each layer would have these RNN nodes, and if these nodes have this right coefficient, you have set up a coefficient, then probably you can deploy it to be used with any kind of a scenario. So how this typically an example would be like object recognition. So you have something kind of a face to be recognized, that it is a human face. So what you would do is you will train a lot of images, and then you would draw the images with a outline saying that this is a human face. And you would pass, let's say, 400, 500 what you call such images of different scenarios, some low light, some highlight, a kind of a image. And then what would happen is that you would have a lot of cases where when you train, you would see that 50% was success, that whatever input message you gave, 50% only gave the right output. And that way 50, 60, 70, and then you will get a maximum point. And that's where you know that your model is working, and that is what you would use in your actual implementation. This is how machine learning works. Deep learning goes a deep further,
So
because
for image recognition, the same principles apply.
oh yes, if you see image recognition, right? It actually operates at a much. There are different layers. So first is so how a typically a deep learning or any machine learning works is that they try to extract features, and any kind of algorithm, how in depth and how much rich information it extracts, that's how you define that this particular algorithm is, or machine learning algorithm or learning algorithm is that much effective. So the more features you want to extract, the more information you want to extract from a given scenario, or a given object, or a given topic, is how training becomes more difficult. And artificial neural networks are basically area of this machine learning where they imagine it like with the human brain, where human brain have neurons, and
Yeah.
they have certain parameters that are set. And when we any kind of message that goes to them is kind of a current, and these currents are basically passed on to this network, and they have a certain set of parameters that are set, and that's how they remember. So for us actually as human beings, how we remember so much information is not exactly some kind of a hard disk we have where we write it. Basically we have certain set of impressions that goes and builds up a pattern, and this pattern is what is becomes an impression for us, and that's how we understand or we remember things. And that is how even artificial neural network works. Based on the parameter setups that are done, it understands or remembers those things, and that's how it if any new scenario comes, it tries to remember from those patterns and then tries to give out a new feature. Do you
So
understand?
basically, it's just a mirror of how our mind works.
Not exactly 100%, but it's a start. So if you say a particular a neural network would be something like how a mouse works, because
Okay.
mouse mental intelligence is what right now we are developing. As far as smaller deep learning platforms are because any deep learning to work, it involves huge amount of resources, specifically GPUs. It involves networking also, and also needs processing of huge amount of data. That kind
Yeah.
of a data, as human beings we are able to do it because of different things. But as far as computers are concerned, still they don't have the kind of processing power to process the kind of things that we are trying to do. So that's why Google is still kind of his intelligence is that of a 10-year-old, or let's say 15-year-old kind of a kid, where it would not understand everything.
Yeah, yeah, that's correct.
And much of these latest generations of chatbots or products that are being developed are actually trying to leverage this deep learning aspects, so that they can do your whole conversation much more generalistic. But the truth is that to develop a chatbot, you don't need always a deep learning kind of a system. You can always develop on a rule-based system with some degree of natural language processing. So right now, what has happened is that thanks to a lot of already developed corpuses and already set of what you call algorithms, which with the current infrastructure that we have, or processing power have, like our laptops or our desktops, these algorithms can work and give a good degree of result. So if you have some kind of a statement that you make, it would very well understand what that statement is, at least in a given set of languages. For example, if I'm speaking in English, there are a lot of already developed models that can understand my English and try to give what are the different parts of the speech are and what is the intent of it. And then accordingly, even it would try to help process it. If we don't, you are developing a chatbot and you don't want to include all these natural language processing to your chatbot, what you can do is you can take help of various APIs. So I'll try to show some of the chatbot platforms that help in this. So what these chatbot platforms are exactly is that these are like intermediaries. So what these do is that you would have a chatbot platform like Facebook Messenger, or let's say Skype or Slack or Telegram. They would interact with this particular platform. This platform would have certain sort of way of programming it. They will provide you certain endpoints. You define what logic goes to each of these endpoints. And then what they will do is the processing, whatever command, the natural language processing of it, they will take care. Or else you can pass whatever messages comes to these platforms. They will process the particular message, and then they will give you what kind of commands are, and based on this command you can map to certain set of operations and you can respond back. So these are the type of chatbot platforms that most of the vendors now provide. Some of the most common are Microsoft Bot Framework, IBM Watson Conversation, Google Dialogflow. So Google Dialogflow is better. So what these platform Google Dialogflow or Watson do is they provide some kind of a kind of flow chart. So you can say that this is a kind of command. If this command comes, this is the output or operation should happen, and then you can draw a kind of a sequence. And much more complex flows can be done just by a drag and drop. These are good for simpler use cases. If you want to develop a much more complicated, then directly you have to program them. Does this answer some of your questions?
Yeah,
Or
I have a few questions.
that?
Like, mostly I'm using the cloud platform AWS, so they have a lot of like machine learning tools, and one of their a framework for bots is like Lex.
Right. And I think that is being used by Alexa as well. So
Yeah,
actually, it's a very good point to talk about right now. So typically, how is the chatbot landscape? So chatbot landscape has a lot of kinds of offerings there. So first offering is you can just design a bot using a very simple drag and drop APIs, or drag and drop tools. So what would it would do is it will tell you that let's say you want to do a simple invitation. You want to send out an invitation. Somebody types and you want to give it that welcome to this and this is my address. Then what you can do is you can drag and drop certain set of the predefined templates, and you can just define what is the date, and then your chatbot is ready. So these are some of the first level. These are meant for novice users.
okay.
Then comes something like a bot framework. So what bot frameworks do is they have again two models. One is they provide you a SDK, and as well as they provide you a kind of a designer where parts of the flow you can design. That is high level flows. So let's say you have certain set of operations defined. Let's say let's say you are doing an airline booking. So for all airline booking, if somebody wants to ask questions related to what is the availability of flights, you can define a certain set of service and certain set of flows. And let's say somebody wants to book tickets, then you would define a certain set of flows. So these would be drag and drop first of all, and then depending on the kind of questions or operations, you can define certain set of subflows. And from these subflows, what you can do is you can then integrate it with your program that runs somewhere in the background, or call up certain APIs that would respond to it. So these are the much more advanced kind of a, but these are basically meant for dealing with how your flow of operation would happen in case of a chatbot, and what kind of scenarios to be handled. All right.
Okay, so these kind of the second type you talked about, so we can develop those in like Dialogflow or in Lex.
True. So, kind of an example is like this Microsoft Bot Framework, or the one that you were talking about, right, Lex? So,
Yeah,
this is what you can define. Okay.
yeah,
But then the next comes is that you want to include some kind of a speech kind of a feature. Then what you can do is in these flows, they also provide certain sort of additional APIs. Like IBM Watson, what it does is it has a lot of other APIs. For example, it has a weather API, it has a text to speech, speech to text API, and it also has something like a language translation API. So it would try to help you to translate kind of any kind of message that comes. Or it would also have something called a personality profile API, where depending on whatever conversation you're doing, it would try to give a personality profile, and that personality profile, based on that, you can adjust your responses. So that kind of APIs are also provided. So they are both provided by Microsoft and IBM. I'm not sure about Google. I've not explored, but must be there also, and Amazon also. So Alexa has certain sort of APIs where using that Alexa, what you call machine, you can convert your speech to text, and then you can, I think, use Lex kind of API to develop general what you call logic or rule set,
yeah,
or retrieval models for your API. And then you can hook up various services like endpoints, like you can hook up something like Telegram to the same model. You can hook up also Skype or others to that same, and then operate. So depends on your requirements, which you can do. And then there is a completely different class of APIs, which are basically programs where you do develop everything from the ground up. So you can, or a lot of these APIs are in open source, so you can develop yourself, and you can build it on your all on your own. But the problem is that many of these things would need a lot of learning of the core, like deep learning, natural language processing, which usually as a developer is not our key idea. Our key idea is that quickly we get some of these APIs,
yeah,
build something quickly. So depending on the complexity of your chatbot that you want to develop, you should be choosing the right tool. So if you have a much more restrictive, or something API which is much more simplified in nature, you should be choosing something like Dialogflow. And let's say if you're looking at a much more wider set of interfaces that you want to integrate, probably Microsoft Bot Framework, but something that is much more involved. It has a much more bigger scope, and some of the other integration factors also that plays into picture. Then your whole architecture may become much more complicated.
yeah.
All right.
So according,
So
one more question on this. So according to you, I think you must have worked on some of these. So,
I have worked
which,
on Watson mostly.
okay, so
Microsoft Bot Framework I'm yet to explore. I've also tried something on Messenger, that is the Messenger bot API. So I I traditionally feel much more comfortable building up the bots myself, like all the open source APIs. So I generally don't go in depth into these, but it's not that difficult. Integration with the APIs becomes much more easier with these, but they have certain cost involved. So
Yeah.
while you're doing a POC is fine, but when you're developing anything, right, you have to also take into mind consideration that per call for these APIs, how much it costs. Because
Yeah.
sometimes once you're offering it to a client, and let's say he wants to deploy it in on-premise, and again his requirement. So if he says I want an on-premise solution, sometimes any of these may not work out because most of them are cloud-based. So if these are cloud-based solutions and client is okay with cloud-based solution, then fine. But if you want to do something on-premise, then you have to go with certain different set of options.
So which among them would be the best choice for like learning, and maybe after that like a little bit of experimentation?
So I suggest to go with these three, right? Yeah, uh, since you are in DevOps kind of a role, uh, if you have any kind of cloud-based options, like you said, the Amazon's offering,
Yeah.
Microsoft Bot Framework, and IBM Watson. Google iLogFlow, I would not recommend because Google's one big problem I always face is that while it is one of the best right now, Google has this knack of changing his services more often. So if you develop something on Google, right, the back support, portability support becomes a bit of a challenge. So I don't support, but again, depending on your requirement, you can try. Okay, because again, it also depends on the client. Because client, what would do is that he would say that I have this particular lock-in, this vendor lock-in, and these are my cloud platform. So if let's say you are developing some kind of a chatting application on Watson, IBM Cloud, then
Mm.
Watson services are the best solution probably because a client would have all the kind of a relationship and all the metering services according to IBM. That works. But let's say somebody is developing something on Azure, then using the Azure's Microsoft Bot frameworks much more better because it has a tighter integration. But let's
Yeah.
say you are developing something on Amazon, then Amazon's APIs I would rather suggest, because once you do this cross, what you call
Hybrid.
cross calls. Let's say you have your application running on one cloud and your
Yeah.
bot framework running on another cloud. What happens? There is a latency time of
Yeah.
response, and probably you may end up paying much more higher cost than probably if you have worked with a bundled approach. So that is
Yeah.
also plays into a kind of a consideration you're developing. And as I again said, not all the frameworks are the same. They have certain advantages and certain disadvantages. So all these things keep play into picture. As far as learning is concerned, learn all. First, learn whichever is quicker for you, which is more relevant for you, the platform that you are going to work or use, and then go forward. And as far as personally, if you ask me for developing personal kind of bots, I would
Yeah.
say Node.js has very good bot framework. Just a minute, let me show that. Um, I'll just show search it. Give me a
Yeah.
minute. Uh, just flow popular. There was a very good. So eh, yeah. So I will just try to share my. Uh, can you see my screen? Uh,
Important.
yeah. So Botter, have you explored?
And no, I have not explored this.
So Botter is a JavaScript or a Node.js based framework
Yeah.
that I would recommend as far as Node.js is concerned. You want to develop something open source, you can explore this one. All right.
Yeah.
So I think they have support for Facebook Messenger,
Yeah.
uh, Twilio, and Twitter. I am sure they may have something for Telegram as well. With that, you can explore that. That is one. And another good part is that as we were talking about Azure, right? So they also
Yeah.
have a framework called Bot Builder. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but this has a only problem is uh, it is much more stuck with your Azure platform. So that's why I would rather suggest that if you're only developing for on Azure and Microsoft based products, then use this framework. Or else Botter is a good example for using. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. And today I'll be talking about creating a demo part. I'll be quickly showing probably a Telegram based bot which I have created. I mean, it's a eco bot just to show you a sample, and that will give you an idea of what things are generally involved in creating a typical bot, or at least the API level. All right.
Yeah.
So let me give you a demo. So I have not done anything great. I've just built. I've used this API called Teleport. So Teleport is a Python API for creating Telegram bots. All right.
Yeah.
And typically Telegram bots are. I will show a demo of how a Telegram bot works. So yeah. So yeah. So this is my bot. Okay. This is a Telegram application, something
Yeah.
like WhatsApp. I
Yeah.
just went into so I created this bot. Typically, the best way to create a bot is actually something. So I'll try to show that you. So how you typically create a bot, a new bot in Telegram is called going to a bot called Botfather. So Botfather is basically a bot developed by Chatbot, developed by Telegram for helping you create a new bots on Telegram. Okay.
Yeah.
So typically to create a new bot, you just go and type something, a command like new bot. Okay. And
Yeah.
then it will say you what kind of bot you need, or it will give an instruction of what you need to give. So here I choose a name. So this is typically how a bot works. Also, it shows. Then
Okay.
it will ask me a set of commands that I need to operate in. And then finally it gives me a ID. So this ID is basically a token. This is token using which I will interact with Telegram to do my processing any user command that comes to my bot. Okay. So this is the bot name that I developed. So this is the bot name I gave. Okay.
Yeah.
So now when I clicked on it, this particular bot, it started. It started with this command.
Yeah.
Okay. So till this time, my program was not running.
Okay.
So it started running from here.
Hmm.
Because so why didn't run? Because my program had not started. So when I started, it start giving me this kind of a response. Since it's an eco bot, right? So it's when I say hi, it responds me with a eco.
Yeah.
That's the very basic operation that it does. I also have a basic help command which gives me a response. That's it. But in the behind the back, how this particular thing works. So I'll try to show you the code. So this is how my bot works. So basically, it has a handle that receives the messages, okay, and it will give me a lot of metadata information of from where, whom, and where I'm trying to get that particular information. And then if that metadata, if any kind of text has been put, let's say anybody types something in a message, I would respond back with that particular response. So if it's a help, then I'll respond this particular statement. But if it is anything else, I'll just copy back the same statement. You get my this is the whole idea of the chatbot. So in this, right, you can you can, this particular section, you can write all your logic that you want to handle whenever anybody sends a message to you. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
And I have a token that, if you remember, I when I created the chatbot, I got a token, some kind of a hash ID.
Yeah.
So so I got this hash ID, right? So this is what I'm using in this particular token. And what I'm trying to do is I'm initializing that particular program, the API, for interacting with Telegram, and I'm passing on that token. Okay, and then what I do is I am passing the function. This particular is the message handler. Now, if you know Node.js, so you have this callback functions, right? So
Yes.
here handle works as a callback function, and I say that this is the basically the loop, infinite loop that would run, where each time any message comes, it would process that particular pass on to this function, and this function is what would process that particular command.
Yeah.
Okay, and I just basically go into infinite loop. Now let's see how it operates. So this is how the particular command looks like. So I ran it, okay, and
Yeah.
it gives me that what kind of message it comes. So it's a text gets, it's a private message, because since it's directly being talked from a particular, I'm initializing it and I'm directly interacting with, that's why it's a private message, and it
Yeah.
gives its ID. Okay, so now let's run once something like, so let's type, let's say, let's go back. So when I type, it gives me a hello. Okay, and here it gives me that information, that what is that. So typically a response of a from kind of a telegram would look like this, where it'll tell you who is the sender and information about the sender, then the date when it received, and all the additional metadata plus the text, and that's how you operate. Okay,
Yeah.
and this is how typically any kind of a chatbot framework, if you're working with Slack or Microsoft, would look like.
So within the loop, we can write any kind of custom code, save it to the database,
Exactly.
or
So
implement some custom functionality.
yes, so what happens, your AI part that I was talking about, right,
Yeah.
handling that any text you get, and then you're doing this whole natural language processing, or probably calling up a database API, everything. So let me go back to my PPT. So that particular this particular thing, right, data services can, or and this two parts,
Yeah.
both of these two parts can directly go into this particular section. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, this particular section. In this, what you can do for natural language processing, you can always pass on to this particular command, you can pass on to your those like bot
So
framework, or you can pass on to, let's say, your Amazon services, and then get a response. That's one way. Or else you can embed this whole program and say that this is the handle and give
yeah.
me a response. So that way also they will operate. So there are multiple ways. And then
Okay.
you can respond. So this send message, what I'm doing is the response that you do. Okay.
Yeah. Correct.
So this is the typical way in which you develop some kind of a chatbot,
Yeah.
and you have to understand this is a basic introduction. If you want to explore more on chatbots, some of the best resources would be the Chatbot magazine. There is a Chatbot magazine. Let me search for it. So Chatbot Magazine is one of the premier places where you'll find a lot of tutorials, lot of topics on chatbots. Okay,
Yeah.
and there are few other there are groups also in Facebook which are very helpful as far as chatbot development is concerned. Much of what I know today of chatbots is thanks to those groups, and some of the best platforms on which to develop certain chatbots to try out. If you're talking about a B2C, you can always try Telegram, like I did quickly. Immediately I got, I mean, I just go log into install Telegram, just go to Botfather, get a Botfather, and just created my bot. That's it. That's it. All about it. And also Facebook Messenger. These are the two easiest ways of doing it. But if you're looking at enterprise level, then Slack or Skype are some of the best options.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if you're in DevOps and you want to do some kind of a DevOps based chatbots, there is a very interesting project from GitHub itself. I'm not sure if it's still operational or not. There is a GitHub bot framework, build bot or something. Okay, I don't find it, but there is a GitHub itself had developed a chatbot framework, which was
Yeah.
basically to automate much of these DevOps activities. That is one of the most interesting places where you can develop a chatbot. So to build a
Yeah. That's
chatbot, to actually build a chatbot, you always don't require a Telegram or a Facebook. You can also build
yeah.
bots for emails itself. Like if anybody sends an email, you can run a bot that will read that email and then process and send a response, which is a much
Yeah.
more easier way of doing it. And depending on the kind of framework, another best areas where you can develop certain chatbots is something called robotic process automation. Okay,
Okay.
in robotic process automation, there is something called UiPath or Blue Prism. So this is something called UiPath. This has certain tutorials of how to develop bots for doing DevOps activities. So you can explore this as well. Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
I think it was helpful. Uh, so if you have
Yeah.
any further questions, probably you can ask or we can close the session.
Yeah. Can I get the recording of this video?
Oh,
The
yes.
session?
Yeah, surely. I would be uh, probably recording. And if you're fine, I will also upload it to YouTube so that not only you, others can get it.
Yeah. Then that's great.
Cool.
But how do I get it? Like you have, I think you have my email ID or something. You can share.
Exactly. I have your email ID, so I will mail you that. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Because I
And
can.
along with this,
I need to like at least review it once before going it when I start to develop it.
oh, yes. So I will share this. I will also share you the PPT because that will be uploaded to SlideShare. And
Yeah.
also, I will be sending you a link to certain ebooks that can help you with the chatbot development. Okay.
Mm. And one important thing that you didn't do, introduce yourself.
uh, uh, okay, let me introduce myself. Um, Actually, I said myself, Priyavad Dash. I work uh, as a developer, and much of my free time I do a lot of Python coding, and that's how I do a lot of automations as my day job as well as my personal level.
Okay.
And that's how, I mean, I have been running this group for last few like 1 or 2 months I've started it. And the idea is to introduce new technology concepts to people. So we have done some previous sessions on what you call our robotic process automation, GDPR, and few other interesting topics. So when I upload and share you the link, you can subscribe to the channel and also explore the channel for the previous recordings. So you'll
Yeah,
find
sure.
So there are a lot of different kind of topics on which I give talks. So that will give you an idea.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, and best of luck, and I hope you do some kind of a chatbot you develop. And definitely, I'll
Yeah,
be
sure.
sharing some ebooks that would help you to start with the chatbot development itself.
Yeah, that's
So I
great.
will give you a drive link where, at least in Python or in Node.js, you can get some hands-on like examples of how to develop chatbots. Okay.
Okay, so one more thing, like you said that you make like sessions about new technologies. So, uh, what else are you interested in, or like what else are you planning?
There is a plan. 1 second, let me stop the sharing and also recording.
Yeah.
Once.